Attorney General Shapiro, I think this is going to be the beginning of a long and meaningful relationship between you and PAR. Please give a warm welcome to the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro.
Thank you. A long and meaningful relationship. I like that. It's like we're dating. Maybe if I do well today, we'll be married by the end of my remarks. Ruth, thank you for the kind introduction and for your work. And Shirley, thank you for the exceptional work you do day in and day out on behalf of all of us. It really is an honor to be with you. I want to recognize Andrew Ritter, someone I've worked with throughout the years, and appreciate his strong advocacy in the Capitol each and every day for all of you. I was hoping we could just have a conversation this morning. I'd like to share some thoughts with you on the topics that I know are on your mind. And then if it's okay, I'd actually like to take some questions. If we're going to be a family here, we should have the opportunity to interact with one another. And let me begin just by saying I'm relatively new as your Attorney General, about 10 and a half months or so. Actually, what's today's date? We're about 10 months into the job. And I said when I was sworn in, and frankly I said throughout the whole last year when I was campaigning, that I had three fundamental objectives. Number one, to restore integrity to our justice system and specifically to the Office of Attorney General. And I'm pleased to be able to stand before you today representing the Office of Attorney General, an office that is pointed forward, that is working hard, that now boasts the strongest, smartest, most diverse and capable staff in the history of that agency. And notwithstanding some of the recent challenges that we faced over the last few years, I can firmly say to you that we are an office with integrity who represents the interests of all Pennsylvanians. The second thing I said I wanted to do was tackle the top public safety, and indeed probably the top public health issue that we face in this Commonwealth, and that is the heroin and opioid epidemic. While I recognize that's not the topic of our conversation today, I want you to know that we're taking a multidisciplinary approach to dealing with it, dramatically increasing the number of arrests of dealers and doctors and others who are fueling this crisis. Understanding that we in law enforcement have to have a mental shift in how we deal with this by understanding drug addiction is a disease, not a crime, and it needs to be treated as such. Working hard to ensure that insurance companies have policies in place that actually promote access to treatment, not make it harder. And looking at the root causes of this crisis, understanding that pharmaceutical companies today are providing the jet fuel that is moving this crisis from where it began to where it is today, and they're going to be held accountable as well by my office. So that's a big part of the work we're doing. The third piece that I pledge to do and that we do every day is we take on the big fights. Whether it's big multinational corporations like Equifax that lose your data, or big student loan companies like Navient, formerly Sallie Mae, that make it harder for students and their families to access college, or by standing up to people that undermine the rights of Pennsylvanians day in and day out. You see, I fundamentally believe that our policies shouldn't be distinguished. Our enforcement shouldn't be different based on what you look like, or who you love, or where you come from. You shouldn't be defined in this Commonwealth or in this country by whether or not you have a disability. Everyone should be equal under the eyes of the law. And we have made it clear, that we will apply the law without fear and without favor. You know, the tone and the tenor of our national conversation today is unbelievably divisive. Our politics have become more coarse. We fight with one another instead of spending time trying to understand one another. The thing that frustrates me most is how most people in Washington just talk and talk and talk. Got a little bit of that here in Harrisburg, too. And instead of doing what we're supposed to do, which is find real solutions to the pressing problems that we face each and every day. Now is a time where we should be less divided and instead come together to deal with the many challenges that we face. I always said I wanted to be the people's AG, the one person every single person could rely on in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to protect their interests and their rights, from an autistic child to a senior citizen. And I'm working hard each and every day to do that. We work hard to remain objective, as I said before, to apply the law without fear and without favor. And at this unique moment in time in our government, in our politics, we need the states to step up more than ever before to do their job. It's interesting. I've got 4 young kids, and so they learn about, in civics, they learn about checks and balances being horizontal, if you will, where the Congress is a check on the president, and the courts are a check on both. And the reality is, in Washington, through multiple administrations in both parties, Congress has basically abdicated its responsibility to be a check on the executive branch. And so the executive has just increased in power and increased their authority through the regulatory process. Now, for some times and some occasions, that's a good thing in some people's minds. In other cases, it might be undermining people's rights. I think it should be less about a particular issue and more about the structure of our government. I share this with you because I think our kids are missing out on a valuable civics lesson, that it's not just about horizontal checks and balances at the federal level, but indeed there must be a very robust set of vertical checks and balances, where the states can be a check on the federal government. Why do I say this? Because I fundamentally believe that we in the states, especially right now, must use the law as a shield against unwarranted federal overreach and as a sword to advance the rights of individuals in our respective states over and over and over again. That's what I've tried to do as your Attorney General. It's one of the reasons why we have beefed up the Office of Civil Rights within the Attorney General's office here in Pennsylvania. And make no mistake, I understand the history of the civil rights movement and understand the valuable role that the intellectual disability community has played in protecting and advancing the rights, not just of the constituents in this room and who you represent, but of all people. Because you understand that an attack on one person because of, again, what they look like or who they love or where they come from or what their disability is an attack on all of us and makes us all less safe. That the law needs to be applied across the board to protect the interests of everyone. And when we defend the weakest, the most vulnerable in our community, and elevate them in this political discourse, and elevate them in our governmental policies, then we are stronger as a community, a commonwealth, and a country. And that, my friends, is the work that we do every single day. Now, I'm a firm believer that we need quality, community-based services for those with autism, those with intellectual disabilities. This isn't something I've just come to recently. This is the kind of work I've been doing throughout my life. We know that over 55,000 people in Pennsylvania receive services for autism spectrum disorder, 1 in 68 children. And you should know that I'm here largely because my father inspired me to get into public service, maybe in a little bit of a circuitous route. You see, my dad is a pediatrician. He's the chief of pediatrics at Abington Jefferson Hospital in Montgomery County. He takes care of autistic children all the time. I actually wanted to be a doctor like my dad, and then I flunked out of pre-med, so I had to go into the next best thing, which is politics and advocacy. But I've tried to follow in my father's footsteps, to care about those children, to care about those who are in need. We know that we need to help, and I've seen this firsthand, help these children, help these individuals who are affected stay in their homes to get the care that they need. Research shows that those with autism and intellectual disabilities receive better care when they're in their homes and in their communities receiving treatment from many of you in this room. I also recognize that those interests are being threatened here in Harrisburg and here in Washington, which is why it's so important that you're here today and here for this conference using your voice to advocate for important policies. You've done wonderful in advocating to bring a living wage to DSPs. And I want to personally commend Governor Wolf, who I know has been at the forefront of this effort. I'm also aware of the regulatory work that is being done by DHS's Office of Developmental Programs. And I'm aware that my office has a role to play in that process. And I'm here today to commit to you that we take that very seriously, that we will review those regulations very seriously and ensure that they are in the best interests of all affected. And again, let me stress how important I see it as making sure that a livable wage is part of that process. I also think it's critically important that we protect insurance for those who have autism. There's obviously a lot of consternation in the insurance marketplace right now. Who the heck knows what Washington is ultimately going to come up with? And we need to make sure that the service gaps that exist are not widened. In fact, the objective for anyone looking to reform the insurance process now must be to shrink that gap and create greater access. I know a little bit about this. When I was a state representative, I helped write Act 62, a statewide insurance mandate for children and youth with on the autism spectrum disorder. I remember also as a state rep working with then Speaker Denny O'Brien to advocate for greater funding for autism services across the Commonwealth. In my 7 years serving in the State House, it's one of the things I am most proud of because of the impact it had on people's lives across Pennsylvania. I also recognize that right now, as your Attorney General, I have a seat at the table, thank God not directly, but a seat at the table to be a voice in Washington, D.C., as they consider different changes to health care. And so I'd like to just tell you a little bit about where I stand. On pre-existing conditions like autism, I believe that must be covered in whatever they come up with in Washington, D.C. We cannot allow them to dismantle the Affordable Care Act and leave those with autism, leave others without the opportunity to get care and coverage. Medicaid funding is critical for individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism, and it's important that that be funded and that that funding be available as part of this reform effort. I want you to know that those CSR payments, those subsidy payments that the president just went out and eliminated last week is something that I think creates chaos in the marketplace, undermines the stability of our insurance marketplace, and makes it harder for 250,000 Pennsylvanians to afford care. I sued the president last week over the fact that he took out those CSR payments, and I'm hopeful that we will be victorious in court and ensure that those payments continue. Those payments are critical to making sure that those, and this is important, those who are working, those who are low income, can afford health care and can afford the kind of coverage that they need. I've spent a great deal of time talking about our mental health parity laws when I go out talking about crime and justice issues in Pennsylvania. We have this law in the book for parity, but in reality, it's just simply not carried out in an equal way. I explain to people really simply that if you break your leg, it's going to be pretty easy for you to find an orthopedist or someone else to put a cast on it. It's really hard to find people to provide mental health care, and it's really hard to have insurance companies cover it with the kind of parity that the law actually calls for. I also think that when you look at our criminal justice system today, a clear argument can be made, and I make this often, that if you go and invest in mental health care, if you go and invest in drug and alcohol treatment, if you go and invest in education and job opportunities, we will see our crime rates in this Commonwealth and in this country drop precipitously. I can recall as a Montgomery County Commissioner Chairman overseeing our county jail, 40% of our inmates in that jail were on psychotropic medication, were dealing with drug and alcohol issues, and they were nonviolent. Just to put an exclamation point on this, if those individuals were given care and treatment that they needed, if there were real parity laws enforced in this country and they could get help before they had to run in with the law, imagine how much safer our communities could be. So I'm a believer in investing in the kind of work you do because A, it's the right thing to do, B, the individuals that you're caring for desperately need it, but C, it's also going to make our communities safer. It's the righteous and just thing to do. And we've got to make sure we get back to that in this country. The final thing I want to say on healthcare is that I also recognize we are in a very changing marketplace right now. Anybody here from Western Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Anybody here of a couple small mom and pop shops, UPMC and Highmark? Anybody ever hear of them? Right? So you're familiar with the way these vertically integrated delivery systems have been butting heads over recent years. Well, here's my view on this. We should have the best quality healthcare in Pennsylvania. And so for organizations like that continue to invest and do good things to be able to keep us healthy and strong, that's great. But they also have a charitable mission that they must adhere to in this Commonwealth. And they get a lot of benefits from you and I as the taxpayers. And the Office of Attorney General is the only agency in the state that is there to police that and ensure that they are acting responsibly. And so I want all of you to know here, not just on UPMC and Highmark, but all of the different health insurers and providers across this Commonwealth, we are taking a very, very careful and close look at their behavior to ensure that they are providing access that is affordable for all Pennsylvanians. And I want you to know that. Last thing I want to say is this. I think we in law enforcement and first responders need to do a better job in general of dealing with those in the disability community. I think that there is compassion in the hearts, certainly of the folks in the Office of Attorney General, but I think in law enforcement and first responders in general, when it comes to dealing with the individuals that you serve every day. But I think there's also a lack of understanding of how you approach someone with autism when you show up at a crime scene. How you deal with someone with a disability when their home is on fire and you go in to save them in their home and you realize that, if you lunge at me and my kids to pull us out of there, we'll be grateful because you're saving our lives. But if you lunge after someone with autism, they may take that in an entirely different way. The intent of that first responder, of those in law enforcement, is the same, which is to save lives and do good things. But what I'm trying to say, friends, is that we have to commit ourselves in law enforcement, we're doing this in the Attorney General's office, to train just a little bit differently so that we understand the needs of the disability community when we show up on a particular crime scene or a particular emergency. I worked with our first responders in some communities to actually develop a training video for firefighters and first responders, which is still on YouTube. I'm a huge YouTube hit on this thing, which is still on YouTube, to try and help on the training process. And I hope that we will see those kinds of efforts expanded to law enforcement and others across the board. The training on how to deal with folks with intellectual disabilities when it comes to law enforcement and first responders activities is really important. Look, it is really an honor for me to be here with you this morning. I'm in this business, I'm in public service because I fundamentally believe the teaching in Scripture that says no one is required to complete the task, but neither are we free to refrain from it. What does that mean? It means that no one is charged with going out there and solving every single problem. But we also can't sit on the sidelines and do nothing about it. We each have to get in the game, have our voice be heard. There are some people in this country that do that every single day, and you are among them. Every single day you go out and you try to make somebody's life better. You care for the most vulnerable. You support them in ways that most people can't even imagine. And so I want to close where I began by simply saying thank you. Thank you for your willingness to do this work. Thank you for caring for those who are less fortunate. And thank you for having me with you this morning to share a few thoughts. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Sure. Whatever you'd like.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. Greg, Rob, do you still have the microphones? Wonderful. Okay, what's the first question? That was wonderful.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, wait, one moment. Let's get a mic to you.
This is always where it gets interesting, I could have filibustered for a half hour, but I thought I'd rather hear from you.
Well, now I know why I voted for you. You just answered my question. My question was about what are you doing to enforce the law and first responders when they encounter a child or a young adult or someone with a disability? And you answered that question for me. I'm very glad. My fear has always been in the event my son, have a meltdown. How are the responders going to react to him? It's the fear is lock him up first, ask questions later. So that has always been my fear. But knowing you're at the top, and I did vote for you, that you have that in your mind, and that you will help those police officers that's in our communities to understand that we have a lot of folks that need special attention, and they just need to be just more responsive to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And look, I think that the power of this organization to move policy is pretty extraordinary. I would respectfully urge you, when you're here fighting for a livable wage, which you should, and regulations that are, that are appropriate, which you should, take some time to work with. You've already convinced me. You don't have to worry about me, but work with the Pennsylvania State Police. Work with the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association. Work with the Municipal Police Chiefs Association, and make sure that part of their training and curriculum includes the kinds of things that we're talking about today. I think that they will all want to be there, and I think hearing from you will help, push that along.
Jean Searle, who's a self-advocate.
Hi, Jean.
Hi, my name is Jean Searle, and I'm the Self-Advocate of the Year. I got an award.
Did you get a ribbon?
No, I got a plaque.
You got a plaque?
Yeah.
All right. Good for you.
I have two questions for you. The one question is, when self-advocates go out and do the protesting in Washington, D.C. or in Harrisburg, do you see what they have done to people with disabilities in the wheelchairs and in scooters, and how they arrested them by dragging them out of certain state reps' office? And how is the how are you going to handle that? And the other question is, it's a two-part question, and the other question is, do you agree that all institutions must be closed for people with disabilities?
Do I agree that the institution should be closed? Okay. Now I know why you got an award. You asked tough questions. Those are good.
That's why I do what I do.
There you go. There you go. And you support that. Let me say that the scenes of individuals in wheelchairs getting dragged out of a hearing in Washington, D.C. about their health care was horrible. I mean, it's really un-American. And you know, at the end of the day, we can have policy differences, and we should argue about those policy differences. But we're not doing that right now in Washington. They're just insulting one another. They're throwing around sort of partisan jabs at one another. I mean, they've all basically just become Twitter personalities. And the reality is they should be solving problems. So would I have a problem if there was a real discussion and there was, you know, substantive disagreement? I wouldn't be pleased about it, but I wouldn't have a problem with it because that's the way our system's supposed to work. But when the images came up of people there trying to advocate for their own health care and they were being forcibly removed, I have a problem with that. Look, that's one of the reasons why I show up in the community. I listen. Even when I don't like what people have to say, I think it's important to listen. I like what you had to say, so it's okay. But you got to listen, you got to engage, and you got to remember we're public servants. We're here to serve the people, and that we shouldn't be insulating ourselves as some of those folks in Washington are doing. As for this bill, I mean, I tend to not get too involved in the legislative process in Harrisburg. I'm a law enforcer, not a lawmaker, but I have some general familiarity with the bill. It makes sense to me, you know, and I'd urge you to just keep pushing forward with your lawmakers here. Okay? Thank you. Have I stumped you? Is that it?
Okay.
Is there another one? Folks, thank you all very, very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you. Thanks so much, okay? It was great. I enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you.